right. Welcome back to the Draft Podcast, a proud member of the Gem City Sports Podcast Network. I'm your host, Paul Adamczak. Today's episode is going to be a little bit shorter than usual. I'm a little under the weather. I don't know if you can tell, but there was no chance I was skipping a Senior Bowl recap. I promised it last week. I'm here to deliver this week. And this week matters too much in the draft process to let it slide, so today we're keeping it focused and efficient. Just one segment today. It's the biggest winners and the biggest losers from Mobile. Let's get into it. Starting off with our biggest winners, I'm going to give you 10. And I'm going to start with the quarterback who I think gained the most this week. Garrett Nussmeier, quarterback from LSU. He measured in at 6'1" even, 202 pounds. He came into Mobile with real questions attached and left with some pretty solid answers. From the opening practices, he showed steady ball placement, clean timing, and a much more controlled operation than what showed up during his uneven, very rocky 2025 season. The velocity wasn't flashy, but it was functional. We knew that. And more importantly, I'd say consistent. He looked comfortable living in the short to intermediate areas where all the NFL quarterbacks really make their money, particularly on the on-rhythm throws and third down concepts. He didn't look lost out there with the NFL coaching. What sealed the evaluation, I think, was his command of the huddle, of the guys around him, playing with a bunch of new guys. He operated in the pocket well. He didn't panic when pressured, and he showed a clear understanding of spacing and progression work against NFL-style defenses. Once again, this is a coach's kid. Winning Senior Bowl MVP wasn't about the trophy. This week reminded evaluators that he's not a projection-only passer. Might have been QB1 coming into 2025 outside of Arch Manning, which obviously never materialized. But it was a reminder that he's a quarterback who can execute an offense, handle live bullets, and function within structure, which puts him back firmly in that QB2, QB3 conversation. Now, in episode 2, I think, of season 2 here, I had Nussmeier second behind Mendoza. I had him ahead of the favorite for QB2, Ty Simpson. But I think overall, Nussmeier is going to be in that Simpson or Nuss as QB2 come this April. Another winner from this week, he might have been the biggest winner overall. Lee Hunter, defensive tackle from Texas Tech, was on a tremendous Texas Tech defense. He measured in at 6'3.5", 320 pounds, and he was the tone center from the jump. On day one of practice, he was arguably the most consistent interior defender on the field, winning with power, winning with leverage, and winning with quick, accurate hands. He routinely controlled blockers at the point of attack. He was able to stand up double teams, and if you can win 2-on-1 at the NFL level, a lot of teams will take you. It's an 11-on-11 game, and if you got two guys, that means you've got an unblocked defender coming up behind you. And he showed enough lateral quickness to disrupt plays before they were even fully developed. So an interior run stuffer with pass rush upside, that'll play at the next level. For an interior defensive lineman, that kind of rep-by-rep dominance is exactly what scouts are looking for in Mobile. What separated him was his reliability. Not just, as I said, the splashy pass rush defender. He's a disruptor who affects the integrity of the pocket, especially up the middle. His rush plan was disciplined, his pad level stayed clean, and the motor never cooled off as the week progressed. Teams covet interior defensive linemen who don't need to be hidden or rotated, and Hunter's week in Mobile firmly positioned him as a player who can anchor reps early at the next level. He may come off the board before anybody else that was there this week in Mobile. Remember, Lee Hunter, the defensive tackle from Texas Tech, one of our biggest winners from the past week. Number 3 on my list of big winners from the Senior Bowl was a guy we said who had a real opportunity to showcase himself well, and he did so. Ted Hurst, the wide receiver from Georgia State, came in at 6'3.25", 207 pounds officially. He may have been the most physically impressive wide receiver in Mobile relative to the expectations, mind you. He consistently won against press coverage using that frame and length. He showed clean releases and stacked defensive backs vertically with ease. The ball tracking stood out immediately, especially on the deep routes where timing and body control matter most. That translated to production throughout the week, and the GPS data backed up his top-tier practice speed and that was only reinforced with what the tape showed. I think he was the third fastest player in mobile this week, and I think the top two were corners, so it's pretty good for a guy at 6'3.5", 207. This was the type of week that small school receivers need to have, and we talked about it last week. He had a meteoric rise, had a meteoric opportunity that led to a meteoric rise. He didn't just look like he belonged, he looked like he could stress NFL coverage guys. Separation at his size matters, and he consistently created it without relying purely on contested catches, which is, if you go back to the last episode, we knew he was going to win 50-50 balls. Could he separate? And yes, he can. So for teams searching for a developmental X receiver with traits and legitimate athletic upside, Ted Hurst's performance moved him from an under the radar nobody to firmly on teams' board. I don't know if he's a top 100 pick, but I think he's between that 100 and 150. Ted Hurst from the Georgia State. All right, going to the other side of the ball, number 4 on our winners list, and there were. I didn't try to overload positions. So if you see some duplicates here, my bad, but I tried to pick like all over the field. But this guy had one of the best weeks, and he certainly put himself on the day 2 conversation. That said, I don't think he gets outside of day 2. Bud Clark, the safety from Texas Christian, TCU, came in at 6'1", 185 pounds. I think he quietly separated himself from the rest of the safety group, demonstrated tremendous range, instincts, ball skills, and a feel for the game that went well beyond the box-only duties, which was the rep on him. Is he going to be able to move? This is a guy who had 15 interceptions in his career at TCU, and the ball skills showed up this week. He consistently showed sideline-to-sideline closing speed, arrived under control, made plays on the football rather than just reacting late. His ability to read route concepts and anticipate throws stood out in both team drills and then during the game as well on Saturday. What he proved is versatility. He showed that he can play downhill, but also has those movement skills and awareness to operate in space, which is a critical trait in today's sub-package heavy NFL defenses. Teams looking for safeties who can survive in modern coverage structures took notice this week, and Clark's instincts and ball skills processing gave him a clean projection into rotational and eventual starting roles. I actually think he starts year 1. I think he's a guy who, when teams draft him, I'm thinking in round 3, just because we'll see what the combine numbers come up. We'll see what kind of athlete he really is at a numerical level. Only 185 pounds, which is kind of small for a safety. We'll see where he runs. He's going to need a good 40 to get into that top 75 conversation. But I think at the end of the day, he's going to be a guy who comes into the NFL, and wherever he's drafted, he's going to play early, and we're going to have this discussion of why didn't we see it earlier? And then you go back and you see the numbers, you see the tape, and you go, yeah, this guy who had ball skills all along. We kind of missed on this guy. So I wanted to include him on the hits list. Bud Clark, if your team drafts Bud Clark in the 3rd round or later, you got a hell of a football player coming. Another hell of a football player with a real chance to rise this week. I believe he was on our top 10 list of potential risers. And that's the linebacker from Pitt, Kyle Lewis, and rise he did. He came in at 5'11 3/4, 224 pounds. Was kind of one of those, is he a strong safety? Is he an off-the-ball linebacker? Well, I think he brought exactly what NFL teams want from modern linebackers: effort, range, and nasty intentions. He consistently flowed to the football in team drills, showed the ability to scrape and fill, and finish plays with authority. The motor never stopped all week long, and that showed up in pursuit reps where he was able to erase angles and close space quickly. Beyond the physicality, Lewis showed functional awareness in zone coverage and didn't look overwhelmed by the speed of the game. I think he profiles as an edge-of-the-box linebacker who can contribute early on special teams while developing into a rotational defender. In a league that values linebackers who can run, tackle, and stay on the field, I think Kyle Lewis's week in Mobile solidified his appeal. And again, I think this is a day 2 pick. And one of those guys that the numbers in Indianapolis may not bear it out, but Kyle Lewis is a football player. I think of like Jonathan Vilma, but smaller, a guy that the numbers aren't gonna say what he is. He's a 3-down linebacker. He's gonna play. Go into the second half of our top 10 here. Actually, pardon me. It's a good spot for a break. Only able to write up one segment, perform one segment tonight. The throat woke up a little scratchy, but I had to do this because I couldn't get out of here without talking about Tyron Montgomery. Remember the name, write it down if you haven't heard it already. He should make some noise in Indianapolis as well. Wide receiver from John Carroll University. Division III, 5'11 and 3/8, 190 pounds. One of the easiest small school evaluations of the week because the traits jumped immediately. He consistently won at the catch point, showed strong hands through contact, and played bigger than his listed size. In contested catch situations, especially in the red zone and sideline drills, he looked comfortable finishing through defenders who were longer, faster, and quite frankly, more physically gifted. That matters because small school receivers don't get drafted on volume stats alone. They get drafted on whether their ball skills translate and when the windows shrink. He'd actually be the first Division III receiver drafted since Pierre Garcon. I'm sure you remember Garcon back in 2008, drafted by the Indianapolis Colts. But jumping back to Tyron Montgomery, what really helped was that he didn't look overwhelmed by the jump in competition. The timing, the tracking, I talked about it with Ted Hurst. The body control held up against Power 5 defensive backs, and that's usually the separating line for D3 prospects. It's not a burner, and he's not going to win purely with separation, but if you're an NFL team looking for a possession-plus receiver who can play through traffic and win late in routes, Tyron Montgomery absolutely helped himself. This is the kind of the week that moves a player from camp body to legitimate day 2, early day 3 conversations. Interesting story on this guy. Didn't play in high school, really only picked up football as a way to help his brother. His brother was the quarterback at John Carroll, needed somebody to throw to, needed somebody to practice catching footballs, and his bro said, hey, I got you. He's not even 6 foot, but a heck of an athlete. Does a nice job of understanding where to put himself in best position to catch the football, and then the hands. The hands showed up all week long. And that is going to be a big thing when you're a small school guy. He's going to have to go an entire training camp without dropping a ball. But he showed well in Mobile. Actually, he was one of the guys that played well at the Shrine Bowl. And then as more guys dropped out of the Senior Bowl, he was then brought in. So one of the rare Shrine Bowl and Senior Bowl players. And we'll talk a little bit more about the Shrine Bowl next week. Tyron Montgomery, write it down, remember it. I think he's still a day 3 draft pick, but man, some real upside there. Another guy on my list of winners, number 7, talked about him last week, Max Ihanachor, or Ihanachor, some discrepancy in how it's actually pronounced. So I'll get it right before April, I'm sure. The offensive tackle about Arizona State. I talked about this guy's story on the show last week. 6'5 and 5/8, 325 pounds. Never put on football pads until 2021. Was a backup for a year. Played a little bit as a sophomore, then a 2-year starter. One of the most athletic dudes. Came to the United States on a basketball scholarship. Football was not in his wheelhouse, but he might have been one of the more quietly impressive offensive linemen in Mobile, especially in the one-on-one pass pro drills where technique gets exposed fast. Consistently showed improvement in hand placement on a rep-to-rep basis. He was a guy who was looking for coaching after every rep, win or lose. Tell me what I did right. Tell me what I did wrong. How do I get better? Coaches loved him. He was a personnel favorite this week. He had better balance through contact and a noticeably stronger anchor than what showed up on earlier tape. So against premier rushers, he didn't just survive. He was able to reset, refit, stayed square. And that's exactly what scouts want to see from a developmental tackle prospect. Honestly, I think the athletic profile has never been the question. It's been about refinement. And this week answered a lot of that. The footwork looked cleaner and got better as the week went on. The posture was more disciplined than what we thought it was going to be, and he showed the ability to absorb power without panicking or grabbing, which tends to be the move from a younger, inexperienced player. Once you get beat, you tend to, I think they call it habeas grabus, right? Didn't do that. Played really disciplined. So his that combination of size, obviously the movement skills, athletic ability, functional strength that he's going to be able to play with at the next level, that translates. And especially for teams that believe they can finish the polish. I think he came into Mobile needing to prove he could handle NFL caliber rushers, and by the end of the week, he absolutely did that. I have heard late first round potential. I don't think he goes there, but then again, I didn't think Josh Simmons was going to be a first round pick, and that was due to injury. But high-end left tackles are hard to find in the NFL, and this guy's got a real chance to be that. So position value, I still think he's a round 2 guy, but if he goes round 1, and I got a couple of months, let's see what the testing numbers come back as. He's got a real shot. Staying with the list of winners, Zion Young, and if you haven't heard of him, I think he's probably the favorite, the media darling as who had the best week. The edge out of Missouri. Measurables came back great. 6'5", 262 pounds. Didn't just have a good Senior Bowl week. He controlled, really, stretches of it. From the first practice, he showed a combination of burst, length, and power that consistently stressed offensive tackles, and that carried straight into the game. Had a great game on Saturday. He won Senior Bowl National Player of the Game. And it wasn't about one splash moment. It was about the accumulation of the disruptive reps, setting the edge, able to collapse the pocket, and then finish when given the chance. And the motor stayed hot all week. And there was a lot of talk about him early in the week. So there were guys last year, and not just last year, but it happens just about every year. Not really this year, though, where a guy has a great first practice, first day or two. And I think Shamar Stewart. And they leave because they get advice from the agent and say, hey, look, that's all you needed to do. You just need to prove it in practice. You had a wow play. You had a wow moment or a wow practice. You did what you needed to do. Our stock is never going to get higher. Wash your hands and get out. You know what I mean? Always leave them wanting more. It's not what Zion Young did this week. He was great at the start, and he was great to finish. I think what elevated Young's evaluation is that he won in multiple ways. He wasn't just running the hoop. He showed inside counter moves. He showed the long arm power and the ability to convert speed to strength. And that's the difference between a rotational rusher and a potential every down player. Think Jared Verse. Coming into the week, he was viewed as a traits-based edge with a lot of upside, but I think leaving Mobile, he looks like a legitimate early round conversation whose game translates to both odd and even fronts. He's a name that's going to go early. I don't think he's the first guy drafted out of Mobile, but I think he's a legitimate first-round guy. Another edge, not a first-round guy, but had a great week. Another small school guy, Nadam Tucker, 6'2", 246 pounds, one of the biggest risers at the entire event. He was a 2025 MAC Defensive Player of the Year. It brings violence, urgency, and real explosion to every practice rep, consistently beating tackles with first step quickness and closing speed. That showed up at the game as well. 2 sacks and forced a fumble, but the tape was already there during the week. He didn't look like a MAC curiosity. He looked like an NFL edge defender who just needed to be seen. Think Mike Green from a year ago. Biggest win for Tucker was how naturally the athleticism translated against better competition. The bend, the burst, the ability to finish plays didn't disappear when the lights got brighter. He showed great out on Saturday. And that's usually the concern when you go against the group of 5 pass rushers, and he erased it. Teams are always looking for pressure creators who can win on passing downs, and Tucker's week in Mobile turned him from a late-round flyer into a legitimate day 2, day 3 target with real pass rush upside. He might have risen 100 draft spots after being invited and then showing out to Mobile. And then finally, number 10, another edge. Really strong week for this edge class. Derek Moore from Michigan, 6'3.5", 254 pounds. Moore set the tone early and often this week by playing a brand of football that NFL coaches love. Heavy hands, physical leverage, and a relentless effort. In one-on-ones, he consistently walked back tackles into the pocket, winning with power and hand usage rather than relying purely on speed. That's bully ball. That's the style that showed up in team drills as well, where he compressed edges and made life uncomfortable for all the quarterbacks. What Moore proved in mobile is that his game scales. He didn't look like a college defender feasting on mismatches. He looked like a pro-ready disruptor who finds and understands how to win reps even when he's not the most explosive athlete on the field. His consistency across practices helped solidify the draft profile, showing teams that he can be trusted to hold his ground, rush with a purpose, and play within a defensive structure. May not be the most flashy edge in this class, but this was the kind of week that locks a player into solid draft territory. A guy that, I don't know if we mentioned Moore last week, but Michigan didn't have a great year, but they had some dudes on that defense, and Derek Moore proved that he's an NFL guy. He's got the build. He's got the strength. He's not a double-digit sack guy, but if you need a defensive end who can set the edge and lock down one side of the line of scrimmage to make things easier for maybe an interior rusher, maybe you've got a really good pass rusher on the other side, you have to take care of Derek Moore, and that makes things easier for the rest of your defense. So that's it. That's my top 10, ending with a couple of edges, 3 straight edges there. Zion Young, Nadam Tucker, and Derek Moore. And I'm going to finish this show with a couple of losers. And I don't mean losers that they lost for different reasons. And I just have 5 guys that I thought could have had better weeks, and one that maybe proved that he's undraftable. And we'll just start with this. I'm going to start with another quarterback. Sawyer Robinson, the quarterback from Baylor, had him in my top 10 list of quarterbacks. And listen, the week in mobile didn't collapse the evaluation, but it also didn't give him the separation he needed. The size was there, measured in at 6'3" and 5/8", 221 pounds. The arm talent showed up, but the consistency didn't. The timing drifted, the ball placement wavered at times, especially in the intermediate areas, and he struggled to stack clean practices together. Had a bad day, had a good day, had an okay day. And in a quarterback group where clarity mattered, Robinson left evaluators wanting more command and decisiveness. He didn't hurt himself, but he missed an opportunity to clearly establish himself as the most translatable passer in the room. And at the Senior Bowl, neutral weeks at quarterback feel like losses. So not a horrible week, but maybe I put him on this list because I was just kind of hoping he would flash. I was hoping he would be on my winners, and he just wasn't. Another guy that I thought, more or less the same reason, was a guy who I think will get drafted, but just didn't really show me what I was hoping he would this week, and that's Nick Singleton, one of the running backs from Penn State. I think the week was trending in the right direction early, particularly in pass protection and route running, where the size and fluidity showed up. But unfortunately, a late week foot injury shut things down before he could stack meaningful team reps or even game exposure. Injuries are a part of the evaluation, and in mobile, availability matters. What's the old adage? The greatest ability is availability, and missing those live reps hurt Singleton's ability to answer lingering questions about his burst and acceleration, 2 traits teams needed to see in person, especially after a down year in state college. So, missed opportunity for Nick Singleton. Still a great athlete. Still think he's going to be a good NFL running back, but one of those things where we're going to have to, all right, now we got to get to the next step of evaluation. You just like to see more positives than negatives, and I think this was it wasn't a plus sign, wasn't necessarily a negative sign. We'll call it an incomplete. Another guy in my losers list, and I'm sorry to say, because I'm a fan of his as a football player, but he's not an NFL quarterback. Diego Pavia, quarterback from Vanderbilt. He entered mobile as a projection bet, and the week largely confirmed why the odds remain long for the Heisman finalist. The weigh-ins reinforced the size concerns. 5'9" and 7/8. He would be the shortest quarterback in the NFL. He's a quarter of an inch shorter than Kyler Murray. And while he flashed the toughness and awareness in spurts, the mechanics inconsistently couldn't stabilize over multiple sessions. In an environment built to reveal translatable strengths, Pavia struggled to present a defining NFL trait. Flashes aren't enough, especially at quarterback. Teams need a minimum physical threshold, and that's why the road for Diego Pavia may be running out of asphalt. Last player here on my list of losers, Jacoby Lane, wide receiver from USC, arrived with expectations to physically impose himself on defensive backs, but that week never really tilted to his favor. Drop showed up at the most inopportune times, and separation wasn't as consistent as his frame suggested it should be. Measured well, 6'4" and 1/8, 196 pounds. You go to Central Casting and ask for a wide receiver, they might come up with Jacoby Lane. So the tools are still real: size, length, catch radius. But mobile is less about traits and more about execution, as we talked about last week. He needed to take control of reps, but instead kind of blended into the pack during a week when separation was the assignment. So not a great week for Jacoby Lane. And finally, I think among the losers here was the tight end group as a collective. I couldn't just pick one. I think the tight end group entered the week with a lot of hype, expecting anyone to separate, but by the end of those practices, that never really happened. Unfortunately, you saw flashes from guys like Justin Joly from North Carolina State, Josh Cuevas from Alabama, and Sam Roush from Stanford in practice, but nothing sustained long enough to change the pre-week conversation. I think Joly had the biggest game. He had 1 catch for 18 yards. Roush had 1 catch for 6. I don't think Cuevas caught a ball. Drops were an issue for all 3 of the guys. Contested catches weren't consistently finished, and there was very little juice after the catch in one-on-ones or even the team periods. In a class already viewed as roll-heavy and maybe ceiling light, Mobile was the chance for a tight end to force scouts to restack the board, but instead, these players didn't carpe enough diem. So that's it. 10 winners, 5 losers, and that's going to do it for this week's episode of the Draft Podcast. Short, sweet, and all about separating signal from noise after a big week in Mobile. Next week, I'll roll out my initial big board for the 2026 NFL Draft, a first real snapshot of how this class stacks up after the Senior Bowl, before the Combine, and we'll also hit some notes from the Shrine Bowl. A few names deserve mention into the conversation as well. So as always, thanks for listening. Thanks for riding with the show. Thanks for supporting Gem City Sports Podcast Network. I'm Paul Adamzak, and I'll talk to you next week.